Falche, welcome back to my channel. A few weeks ago we talked about Anne Bonny, the Irish pirate queen of the Caribbean. Today, let's take a look at another Irish pirate queen, who was even more badass than Bonny. A woman who even stood up to Queen Elizabeth I, the Irish pirate queen of Connacht, Grania Whale. You might know Grania Whale under a different name, maybe an anglicized version of her name, Grace O'Malley, or under one of those names. They all mean the same person. The name Whale is more of a nickname for her. It roughly translates to bold. Well, why bold of all names? You're about to find out. Grania was born around 1530 on Clare Island, in County Mayo in the west of Ireland. She was born into the well-known O'Malley clan, and she was the daughter of the clan chief, Eoin Dubh Dara O'Malley, and his wife Margaret, who is also known as Maeve. Dubh Dara is also more of a nickname, and roughly translates to Black Oak. To give you a bit of a historical context, this was the time when Henry VIII ruled England, and called himself the Lord of Ireland. But despite that, in that time the Irish princes and lords were mostly left to their own devices, for Henry didn't care much about Ireland. But that was about to change during Grania's lifetime. However, Grania's father was the chieftain of the O'Malleys and the ruler of Umul. He and his clan were a family of seafarers, and made a lot of money through plundering. So you basically could say that Grania was born into a family of pirates. The clan built a lot of castles facing the sea to oversee and protect their territories, and controlled a not so small territory of the southwest of today's County Mayo. Grania was born as the only child of her parents, even though she had a half-brother from her father's side, Donal na Pipa. But even though she was a girl, and she had this half-brother, she still was considered the heir of her clan's land and seafaring activities, and later inherited everything when her father died. She grew up facing constant threats from land and sea, and soon began to find an interest in the sea and the art of navigation. Her father was happy to teach her how to navigate, and since the family was influential and wealthy, she also got the best education possible and learned several languages, including Gaelic, French, Latin, and Spanish. As a young girl, she was so fascinated by her father's craft and the sea that she wanted to accompany him at a trading expedition to Spain. Her father, though, wasn't fond of that idea. Maybe because he was afraid for her, or maybe because she was a girl, but whatever reason he might have had, he came up with an excuse. He told her that she wouldn't be able to come with him since her hair was so long it would catch up in the ship's rope, and that was just too big of a risk. But Grania wasn't done. Without further ado, she cut most of her hair off, earning her the nickname Whale, meaning bald or with cropped hair. In doing so, she embarrassed her father, but in the end, got her way. In 1546, when she was only around 15 or 16, she was married to Donal O'Flaherty, the leader of the O'Flaherty clan, and a good match from the point of view of Grania's father. Together, the pair had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, Owen, Maeve, and Mara. But the marriage didn't last for very long, for only around 8 years later, when Grania was around 23, Donal died in an ambush. After his death, Grania defended her castle against the English, and gained a lot of men loyal to her. She took her revenge on the murderer of her husband, and plundered his residence in Loch Corrib. Then she went back to her own lands on Clare Island, and took over the family's business. With her ships and her men, she took control over the coast of Mayo, and hijacked lonely ships near the coast. The Pirate Queen was born, gaining wealth and riches. Rumor has it that she took a shipwrecked sailor as her lover for a brief time. And when that man was murdered too, she again took revenge on the murderer. This time, it was the MacMahons of Ballyvoy, and she attacked their castle in Doona and killed her lover's murderer. This raid earned her the title Dark Lady of Doona, and taught even the last man that this woman is not to be taken lightly. She decided to marry a second time, mostly out of political reasons. Her second husband was Richard O'Burke, of the influential clan of the O'Burkes. But they did not marry under Christian laws, but under Breton laws, which meant that the husband was allowed to have more than one wife, but also that the wife had the right to divorce her husband. And so, after a while, it is said that one day she stood by her window and simply shouted out to him that he was dismissed. If that really happens is to be discussed, but they did split up. During the brief time they were married, though, Grania received her fourth child, a son. Legend has it that the son was born on sea, and that Grania, only an hour after she gave birth, wrapped her son into a blanket, stood up, took a sword in hand, and defended her ship against rival pirates. Again, we do not know for sure if that story is true, but the fact that this legend is still alive shows what a badass Grania must have been. Meanwhile in England, Henry Tudor had died. His son and later his daughter Mary had climbed the throne and also died, and Elizabeth took over. She tried to strengthen her influence in Ireland and demanded that the Irish lords and clans acknowledge the sovereignty of the English crown over the Emerald Isle. In return, the lords would receive a title and the rule over the lands. Well, some Irish lords followed that demand. Others started a fight for their rights. You wonder on which side Grania was to find? Well, her culture was threatened, and some lords, strengthened by the influence of Queen Elizabeth, threatened her land. So Grania was everything but a fan of a new so-called queen. Under no circumstances would she bow before her. Grania gathered even more men together, extended her raids, and gained the attention of the new English queen. Elizabeth I, of course, wanted her colonization plans to succeed, and therefore needed Grania out of her way, and put a bounty on Grania's head. This brought Sir Richard Bingham on the plan. Bingham, eager for the money and to earn the respect of his queen, tried everything to bring Grania down. He even managed to capture her oldest son, execute him, and take over his castle. After a few battles, Bingham finally managed to capture Grania herself, and she was imprisoned in Limerick and later in Dublin. It's not really recorded how, but she somehow managed to escape after a few years. And when she lost her lands, influence and wealth, and then learned that Bingham had captured her brother and one of her sons, she did what probably no one would have expected. She turned to Queen Elizabeth. After a written petition, she even went to London to visit the Queen. The Irish chieftain and the English Queen, a meeting of historical magnitude. But, proud as she was, Grania refused to bow before the Queen, for she didn't recognize her as her own queen. And she somehow managed that Elizabeth respected her enough to not let her be hanged for that kind of disrespect. She is even said to have carried a dagger with her, which was found by the guards, but when she explained she carried it for her safety and not to attack Elizabeth, Elizabeth accepted that for some reason. The two women had a long conversation, in Latin, for Grania didn't speak English and Elizabeth wasn't able to speak Irish. During that conversation, Grania told Elizabeth the reasons for her actions, and described them as acts of desperation to secure the livelihood of her people. Grania even convinced Elizabeth to pardon herself, free her family members, and to restore her lands, while getting Bingham under control. In return, she swore to only raise swords against the enemies of England from then on, and that she would stop to support the Irish rebels. Despite all protests of Bingham, Grania was pardoned and returned to Rockfleet Castle in Ireland, while Bingham lost his titles in Ireland. Grania's sons, well, the two that still lived, became chieftains by English laws and were allowed to continue their business under English flag. But even though most of Grania's demands were met, she was still sour about the few that weren't, and therefore continued to support the Irish rebels in secret. Still, she had a good life from then on, until she finally died, probably of old age, in 1603 on Rockfleet Castle. She was probably buried in Clare Island Abbey, at her family's traditional burial place. And that was the end of Grania Whale, the pirate queen of Connacht, the head of the O'Malley dynasty, and the warrior for Irish independence. To this day, the legend lives on, and she remains an important historical personality of Ireland, and an inspiration for various plays, songs, books, and more. Various places from her time can be visited today, like Rockfleet Castle in Burrishoole, where she spent her last days, or Kildavnet Castle on Echill Island, and the headquarters of her clan on Clare Island. Near Clare Island, in Louisborough in County Mayo, there's also a Grace O'Malley Museum, which has an exhibition dedicated to her life. And if you're interested in Irish folk music, you might know the song Oro Shedewatawaya, translating to Oro Welcome Home, which sings of the return of Grania after her imprisonment by Bingham. If you don't know the song, there are various versions of it on YouTube. One of my personal favorites is the version of Sholin. It's definitely worth a listen. And that's it for today. Grania Whale, or Grace O'Malley, is definitely a badass Irish woman who earned her place in history. Who is your favorite son or daughter of Ireland? Let me know in the comments down below. See you next time. Bye!